The plan for today is just to finish the book of Judges, however long that takes us. I think it'll be shorter than normal, but we'll see. Judges chapter 13, where we made it to. There's really only one judge left. We've looked at every judge by name. There's really only one judge left, depending on if you count a couple others, but you probably shouldn't. And the last one is maybe the most famous, certainly one of the two most famous ones, the one we haven't talked about yet, which is introduced in chapter 13, Judges 13. Your pericope heading says something like the birth of Samson. So what do you know about Samson? Anything? Anything we know about Samson without looking at the story? Without cheating, you bunch of cheaters. Magic hair. Yeah, magic hair. Nazarite, Nazarene, yep. There's that lion he killed that one time, yep. Sure enough, that's good. He was a sucker for women, yep. Unlike the rest of us. He what? Pushed a building down or pulled a building down, probably more aptly. Yep, true. Anything else? Delilah, of course, Delilah. Yep, that's good. Verse 1. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Remember, we've been looking at Judges now for 4 or 5 weeks. This is one of those drum beats we have throughout the book. People did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. People did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And we have that cycle repeated over and over again where the people sin and then they cry out to God for help. And then God sends them help in the form of a judge. And that help comes primarily in physical help as a judge comes and leads against a certain group of people who are fighting against them. Midianites, the Amalekites, the Amorites, a lot of the same characters that we're used to. And then the kind of ultimate one that we have with Samson is the Philistines, which is seen as the primary enemy of Israel, both historically and biblically. Certainly in the Old Testament, their enemy they dealt with the most often was Philistines. We have that here with Samson as well. But we have this continual return to the evil that they did before when the judge dies. So God raises up a judge. That's good for a while. Normally it's 30 or 40 years the judge is in charge, protecting them. And then once the judge dies, the people go back to evil, back to worshiping other gods. And then because of that, find themselves being oppressed by a new nation that God has sent to discipline them. So we have that again here. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. Okay, so that's the rhythm. They did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They did what was right in their own eyes. Because of that, God gave them over to other nations to be oppressed. That's His form of discipline. We've talked about several times that part of the reason the Old Testament exists is to show us that no matter what God did outside of us, it would never be enough. No matter how much discipline He gave us for our bad acts or reward He gave us for our good acts, etc. No matter how beautiful the law was that He gave us or examples He gave us or freedom or slavery, whatever it is, that until He did something in our hearts, we would never have turned to Him. So we see that here again. Verse 2 introduces us to his parents. There was a certain man of Zorah, the tribe of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, Behold, you are barren and have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Therefore be careful and drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing clean, for behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. And the woman came and told her husband, A man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of the angel of God, very awesome. I didn't ask him where he was from, but he did not tell me his name. But he said to me, Behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. Again, we have here, like we've seen over and over a few times in the book of Judges, this angel of Yahweh figure or messenger of Yahweh, which is almost certainly, if not Jesus himself, the pre-incarnate Jesus, some form of Yahweh. Because we have this intermingling again, where this messenger of Yahweh is also called Yahweh. He says, I did this and this and this, meaning God did this and this and this. There's this intentional muddying of the waters in the Old Testament about how to understand Yahweh and this messenger of Yahweh who acts as Yahweh and yet is in physical form, who appears and can be seen and is fed, is brought food under the tree, sits under the shade of a tree, etc., in a way that Yahweh cannot do without a body. We have one who is also called Yahweh, who is embodied. So there's this. There are many Trinitarian such hints throughout the Old Testament, but we see many of them with this character referred to as the angel or messenger of Yahweh that we have here again with Samson and the promises about Samson. Verse 8, then Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come again to us and teach us what to do with the child who will be born. And God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman as she sat in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. So the woman ran quickly and told her husband, behold, the man who came to me the other day has appeared to me. Interesting, calls him a man. And Manoah arose and went after his wife and came to the man, said to him, are you the man who spoke to this woman? And he said, I am. And Manoah said, when your words came true, what is it to be this child's manner of life? What is his mission? The angel of the Lord said to Manoah, of all that I said to the woman, let her be careful, not to eat, not to drink, etc. Manoah said to the angel, let us detain you and prepare a young goat for you. And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, if you detain me, I will not eat of your food. If you prepare a burnt offering, then offer it to the Lord. Verse 19, so Manoah took the young goat with the grain offering and offered it on the rock to the Lord, the one who works wonders. And Manoah and his wife were watching. And when the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord went up in the flame of the altar. Manoah and his wife were watching, and they fell on their faces to the ground. The angel of Yahweh appeared no more to Manoah and to his wife. And Manoah knew it was the angel of Yahweh. And Manoah said, as always happens, Manoah said to his wife, we shall surely die, for we have seen God. Then she bears a son, calls him Samson. The young man grows, the Lord blessed him. The Spirit of the Lord began to stir him in Mahanadan between Zorah and Ashtal. Okay, so we have this birth narrative of Samson, which is similar to us by this point in the Old Testament. We have similar other narratives of other people in the Old Testament where the angel of Yahweh comes and all these things. A barren woman is the one that God chooses, as often is the case, to be the one that produces the main character in this little story. Samson is a weird dude. It's a weird story. Very weird things that happen in the story of Samson, certainly to our modern ears. First, we won't read the whole thing, so I'll give you a summary basically. First, he demands to have a Philistine wife, which the reader reads and thinks not even Samson can do what God has told them to do. Even Samson is falling into the trap the Israelites continually fell into by marrying women of other nations. But he demands a Philistine wife. This is before Delilah. This isn't Delilah. On his way to see her, he fights and kills a lion, just kind of like a side note. Days later, he ends up back by that lion, and inside of the lion, bees have made their home, and there's honey now. And so he reaches in the carcass of the lion, gets the honey from the bees, and eats it on his way to see his wife and to the wedding feast. At the wedding feast, after they have been married, he tells 30 of her family members a riddle and challenges them to solve it. And the riddle is about the lion and the bee and the honey inside the lion and all these things, and they never would have gotten it. And he bets them, if you get the riddle, then I will provide for you 30 pieces of clothing. That is one clothing for all of you. But if you don't get the riddle, you provide me with 30 pieces of clothing. And in an amazing bit of foreshadowing, his new wife, who is family with the family members, of course, pesters him to tell her what the answer to the riddle is because her family wants to know and they're trying to get it through her. And he says no. And then she says, please, apparently in stronger terms. And he says no. And then she continually pesters him about telling her what the riddle answer is. And finally, he tells her. And in a shocking turn of events, she tells them. And so they win the riddle. And Samson gets very upset and goes to the nearest town, kills 30 people, takes their clothes off of them, and brings them back to her 30 family members and gives it to them. Comes back very mad and leaves, storms out. And they think, well, he doesn't like his wife, but she's here to be married. We need to give her to marriage. So they actually give his wife to his brother to be married instead. So now they're married. Days later, Samson comes back after he has stormed off unhappily. And he's bringing a young goat with him because he's going to make up with his new wife. He's going to apologize for being so mad and doing those things. But he gets there and finds out that they have now given his wife to his brother. So his wife is no longer his wife. His wife is his brother's wife. And he gets very mad. And so in the hilarious story, of course, he takes foxes. You remember this part? He takes 300 foxes and ties them together by the tail and with a torch between each of them. And the foxes run wild in the area of this family and burn all of their crops and all of their livestock and all their buildings, and all these things are burnt to the ground by these crazed foxes. The people of the town then revolt and kill Samson's wife and her father, and then Samson gets revenge on them. Look at verse 9. Then the Philistines came up and encamped in Judah and made a raid on Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? They said, we've come up to bind Samson to do as him as he did to us. right? He destroyed our place, killed people. Verse 11, then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Edom and said to Samson, do you not know the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this you have done to us? And he said to them, as they did to me, so I have done to them. And they said to him, we have come down to bind you, that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines. Okay, so Jews scared of the Philistines. Philistines more powerful. They're the ones ruling in the land, like Rome was when Christ came. Philistines come angry at Samson. The Jews said, what are you doing to us? Don't you know these people are ruling over us? Why would you harm them? And Samson says, go ahead, give me into their hands. Tie me up, bind me, and bring me to them. Verse 13, they said to him, we will only bind you and give you into their hands. We'll surely not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that had caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, put out his hand and took it, and with it he struck 1,000 men. And Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey have I struck down 1,000 men. And then he threw away the jawbone out of his hand, it says. And then he was thirsty, so he got something to drink. There's these stories about Samson are interesting, fascinating. You saw them as you were a kid, but they're more morally challenging as you're an adult to deal with exactly the rightness of these things. One of the crucial things to have in mind as reading the Old Testament, certainly perhaps chiefly the book of Judges, is that just because you read it doesn't mean that God is giving his thumbs up to everything that is done, though it seems he gives thumbs up to some of those things. We talked about that last week with Jephthah and Jephthah's oath and those things. We certainly see that with Samson, him blatantly disobeying the Lord from the very beginning, marrying an outsider, and then he continues to do some odd things as he continues. Chapter 16 is a story you probably know better, which is the story of Samson and Delilah. Verse 1, Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute, and he went into her. The Gazites were told, Samson has come here, and they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait till the light of morning, and we'll kill him. But Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the gate of the city, the 2 posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that's in front of the Hebron. After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him, and we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies and how you might be bound, that one could subdue you. Again, it's important. Samson is in many ways a prototype of Israel as a whole, as he is the one who is promised by God that if he marries foreign women, it will be his demise, and then he marries foreign women, and it's his demise. But once again, like we have a minute ago, we have Samson in marital conversations with Delilah, as he was with his first wife. And Delilah has been bribed, as did the first wife, to find out some information from Samson no one else knows. And so she comes to him to ask him what it is. Samson said to her, verse 7, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now she had men lying in ambush in the inner chamber, and she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he snapped the bowstrings as a thread of flax snaps when it touches the fire, for the secret of his strength was not known. I love this. Then Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Please tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, if they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And the men lying in ambush were in an inner chamber, but he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. Then Delilah said to Samson, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web and fasten it tight with a pin, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his head and wove them into the web. She made them tight with the pin and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep and pulled away the pin, the loom, and the web. And she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart's not with me? Isn't that wonderful? There's jokes to be had here about marriage and marriage communication, right? As she has literally had an ambush set up for him for days, and yet somehow he's the one at fault in the conversation, right? How dare you lie to me and not be honest with me, not trust me while I have all these people laying in ambush to destroy you? She asked him, Until now, verse 13 again, you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, oh, I said that part already. Verse 15, she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart's not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies. And when she pressed him hard with her words, day after day, and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. That word in Hebrew, vex, is actually the English word, just plain annoyed. It's not actually, but it works. You get the idea. And he told her all his heart and said to her, a razor has never come upon my head, for I've been a Nazarite to God. If my head is shaved, my strength will leave me. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up again, for he has told me all his heart. And you know the story. She ties him, they capture him, they gouge out his eyes and throw him in prison, and he's in prison for an indistinguished period of time. They call him out one last time. They go get him. They drag him to be embarrassed. He cries out to God for one more moment of strength and then pulls down the pillars on the building and likely destroyed what Philistia could have been because of all the men that would have died, all the important men that would have died at this place when he called out for the last moment of strength. But now, big idea. Jephthah, who's a controversial character, who's hard to make sense of. We talked about the couple of options of what to do with his vow that he made about his daughter and all that. Either one of which, him doing the wrong thing. Jephthah, complicated story, complicated character. How to feel about him morally is questionable. Samson, probably even more so. Complicated stories, complicated character. How to feel about him morally, even more so. So what sense was God with him? Right, he gave him strength and he answered his prayer in the end. Certainly much of his life was against the Lord and doing things that were disobedient. This is the case with much of the Old Testament and even much of the Bible, where we have God using flawed people as the means by which he is bringing about Christ. Right? If there was no Jephthah, who was such a warrior against the oppressors, if there was no Samson, then Jesus never comes, right, in the story of the narrative of the Bible. In that these are the means that God used to protect Israel, to watch over Israel, to produce the next generation of Israelites to lead on down to Christ. So it's crucial that we don't read the Old Testament thinking everything is prescribed, but some things are just described. Some things are just telling us what happened. All right, chapter 17 gives us a story of a guy named Micah. Weird story. Steals from his mother 1,100 pieces of silver. Interestingly, the same price that was given to Delilah. Maybe there's a connection there. Again, maybe the numbers are metaphorical. Who knows? But he steals 1,100 pieces of silver from his mother. His mother curses him, apparently. She stays up all night saying curses against him, which scares him. And so he fesses up to it and says he's the one that stole the 1,100 pieces of silver. She takes a good portion of that silver and makes a little idol, which was common for Jews in the time. He thought it was an idol to Yahweh, very similar to the golden calf thing we looked at who knows how long ago in Exodus, where they made this little image and intended to worship God with the little image. And she did that in her home. And Micah begins worshiping these God in these ways. He then appoints one of his sons a priest to be the one that deals with those gods until a Levite priest shows up on his porch. And then he hires this Levite priest to be his in-home priest and thinks that he will be right with God for it. Look at chapter 17, verse 13, 12. And Micah ordained the Levite, and the young man became his priest and was in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, now I know the Lord will prosper me because I have a Levite as a priest. The reason this little story of Micah in 17 and 18 is in the Bible is unclear. We don't really know. But here's one of the themes that we see here for sure that we've seen throughout the book of Judges is the desire of the people to control God. The desire of the people to think, if I do X, Y, and Z, then God will have to do for me A, B, and C. Whatever that is. Right? And one of the big themes of the Bible is that we can't control God. That, as C.S. Lewis says, he's not a tame lion. He's not the sort of God that we can control by our offering this sacrifice this way or doing this thing this way. And much of the allure to foreign gods in the other lands was that they promised things like, if you did this, then we will grant you fertility. If you do things this way, then we'll make sure it rains on your crops. Right? They offered this veil of control in your life. Yahweh has never offered that to his people. It has always been him as the high and utmost God who will do what he wants, and you will respond humbly to him, or you'll be in rebellion against him. Right? He's unable to be controlled. The whole idea of Ecclesiastes, where it says everything is meaningless, the word is everything is hevel, right? It's vapor. That is, we want to reach out and control it, the things in our life, but we just don't have control over that which is in front of us. God has not granted us control. He has granted us the ability to turn the pages and see what he has next for us, to decide to obey or not to obey, but that is it. And we see here the same sort of thing with Micah, with this Jew who fits right into that line of thinking. Says, if I do things this way, if I have my little home priestly setup, and I even find a Levite, the tribe of Levi, to be a priest, and I hire him to do it this way, then God will surely prosper me because I'm doing things this way. That whole line of thinking is spoken against in the book of Judges and is throughout the Old Testament. The idea of, if I do this, then God will owe me this, which is no different than righteousness by works. That it is what that is. It is the anti-gospel in the New Testament. If I do circumcision, I'll be accepted. If I do X, Y, and Z of the Jewish Old Covenant laws, I'll be accepted by God, which really means that God will be in my debt. God will have to bring me to heaven. God will have to give me a pretty good life. And we talked about on Sunday or Sunday before that if in your head you have the mindset of, well, because I go to church and because I do things pretty good and because I pray and because I give money and all those things, then God owes me a pretty good life, not to make me too sick, not to make me too poor, and to bring me to heaven when I die. Then your mindset is no different than that of the Pharisees. It just comes out in different flavor. We talked about the story of the prodigal sons, that both sons in that story wanted the father's things and not the father, wanted what the father could give them and not the father, and that both sons, the real righteous one and the real immoral one, were lost at some point in the story. And the only difference between the two is that one comes back in humility, recognizing he is entirely leaning upon the grace of God, the grace of the Father, and the older son doesn't get to that point when the story ends. So as long as we hold on to the idea that we can control our lives, not only will we have no peace because we have no control over what happens to us the rest of the day, but we're also not approaching God in the way that he intends for us to approach him, as the one who is in total control. Hallelujah for that. Verse 17, verse 6. Over the final few chapters, we're going to see this statement is said over and over again. And I love the author says this over and over again because he's making sure you're remembering everything I'm saying here is not good. Verse 7 or 6. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. There was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And then he tells you about Jephthah, tells you about Samson, tells you about the things that are to come that are even worse than those things. But the author continually says they were doing what was right in their own eyes. They had no king, and they were doing evil. Chapter 18, summary. One of the tribes of Israel, Dan, comes in and loots Micah's house, takes his idols, takes his priest, who more than willing went with them because they offered more money. So the one who stole ends up being stolen from, and we're told injustice ruled in the land. Chapter 19 is brutal. I mean brutal chapter. The story in chapter 19 is tough to read. And again, the point of the book of Judges, Brother Wayne calls it the Dark Ages of Israel. The point of the book is in large part what the world becomes when we turn away from God. And we're getting another nice, thorough picture of that in our current world. But what the world becomes and what it ends up looking like when we go against what the Lord intends for us, what our Creator has intended for us. What the level of evil that our hearts are capable of. So this story, a Levite and his wife, calls her a concubine, but that's language for non-Israelite wife. And it's clear he's talking about wife when you read the story. Where do we start? Look at verse 20. Him and his wife go into this new city in Gibeah, and they're going to stay in the sort of courtyard of the city because no one has offered to bring them into their home. Let's do verse 17. He lifted up his eyes and saw the traveler in the open square of the city, and the old man said, "Where are you going, and where do you come from?" And he said to him, "We're passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to the house of the Lord, but no one's taken me into his house." The old man says, "We have straw and feed for our donkeys, with bread and wine for me and your female servant, and the young man with your servants. There's no lack of anything." The old man said, "Peace be to you. I will care for all your wants. Do not spend the night in the square." So he brought him into his house and gave the donkeys feed, and they washed their feet, ate, and drank. Okay, nothing out of the ordinary yet. It's a little odd they weren't taken into the homes in this culture. We're getting a picture into the depravity of the city that we're dealing with, which was of the tribe of Benjamin, the city of Gibeah. They don't take them into their homes. They're staying in the courtyard. Finally, an old man sees them and invites them into his house. Okay. As they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. Does this sound familiar? They said to the old man, the master of the house, bring out the man who came into your house that we may know him. And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, no, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since this man has come into my house, do not do this vile thing. Behold, here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Now if you've been here, or if you know the Bible, that story sounds exactly like another story, which is more well known, the story of Lot and the angels that go into his home. Verse 24. Violate them and do with them what seems good to you, but against this man do not do this outrageous thing. But the men would not listen to him, so the man seized his concubine and made her go out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. And as morning appeared, the woman came and fell down to the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. And her master rose up in the morning, and when he opened the doors of the house and went out to go on his way, behold, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, get up, let us be going, but there was no answer. So this woman, this wife of his, is killed by these men, is abused and killed by these men of this city. And he, in response, hurts us to read it, but he, in response, cuts her up and sends her body parts to all the tribes of Israel. And he does this to say, with a message apparently that says this, what has been done to her, his wife, in Israel itself, in the tribe of Benjamin, as a call to action. And it works. Verse 30. All who saw it said, such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day the people of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak. Then all the people of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. We have this very militaristic picture of all the tribes sending all of their strong men, and they all gather as one. So there is proper outrage at the event that we read about in chapter 19. Right? So people of Israel, men of Israel had done this. Men of the tribe of Benjamin, apparently, had done this. And the message is sent out to the people across Israel. They have proper outrage at the event. Verse 2, the chiefs of all the people of all the tribes of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 men on foot that drew the sword. And the people of Israel said, tell us, how did this evil happen? And the Levite recounts it, makes himself look a lot better than he actually was, which is what we tend to do as he tells the story. Verse 8, and all the people arose as one man, saying, none of us will go to his tent, none of us will return to his house. But now this is what we'll do to Gibeah. We'll go up against it by lot. Okay, so the people of Israel respond to the call of this man losing his wife being abused, though he didn't do much to help the situation. He didn't inform them of that. And they come up to fight without asking questions. And the rest of the book of Judges, 20 and 21 in large part, are them destroying Benjamin, this tribe of Benjamin, much of them at least. Look at chapter 21, verse 1. After warring with Benjamin, the men of Israel had sworn at Mizpah, no one of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamite. And the people came to Bethel and sat there till evening before God, and they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. And they said, O Lord, the God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel? That today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel. Okay, so they know all the promises. They know the importance of 12 tribes of Israel, all those things. And so they have this one tribe who they have just decimated of their adult men. And they're longing to help this tribe not to die out. And so they have made this vow not to give their daughters in marriage to the Benjamite sons. So that's a problem because they want Benjamin not to die, but they don't have any husbands to give or wives to give to the young men. Verse 8, and they said, what one is there of the tribes of Israel that did not come up to the Lord to Mizpah? And behold, no one had come to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. So what happens is all of Israel was commanded to come to fight against these people, against the Benjamites. One group didn't come, apparently, despite being charged to do so. They then go to that group, kill the grown men of that group, take the young women of that group, bring them back and give them as wives to the Benjamites. And then when it still wasn't enough, they sent the men that were left down to this apparent party that was going on where the young women who were single would come out and dance, and they said, go and find your wives there, and they did that. And that's the end of the book of Judges. Look at verse 24 for the last couple of verses of this book. And the people of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family. And they went out from there, every man to his inheritance. Verse 25, how the book ends. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Judges is not a fun book for all kinds of reasons. Not a fun book to read, not a fun book for us to go through, but it's an important book. It's important in the history of Israel. If at any point in Israel's history it was clear that what God told them would happen if they left would actually happen, this is that point. We even have God, we saw a few times in Judges where God says, I told you this was going to occur. Why are you so shocked that you have found yourself in utter disarray? And we see tastes of that now. Now, it's not coincidence probably that verse 25, again, reminds us there was no king in Israel. And then the next book is Ruth, which is taking us to David, right, who is the great-grandmother of King David, which is the king of kings before Jesus. Ruth is one of my favorite books, so we'll start that one next time. And probably just a couple of weeks in that one. Questions, thoughts, comments, remarks, disagreements, debates, additions, omissions, etc. Yes. General. No, we're past Moses. I'm sorry. Moses wrote the Torah, so Genesis to Deuteronomy, and even then was written mostly by Moses, but scribes would edit it as needed later on, and that's fine. Doesn't impact the view of Scripture at all. But the period of Joshua and Judges and the later were written by Jewish scribes, but we're less clear on who did the writing. Joshua probably wrote Joshua. Yep. Her doing this stuff to him? Yeah. Certainly possible. Yeah, that's part of the weirdness of it all, right? Huh? Yeah, just a big muscled up dummy. Yeah, that's possible. Yeah. Right. Yeah, may have been. Yeah, he's an odd character in many ways. He certainly doesn't strike us as the one who's leading intellectual thought in Jerusalem at the time. Much more of a grab a donkey's jawbone than a let's talk this out sort of situation. Yeah. Yeah, it's giving him the strength he needs. Yeah. Right. And I think right, absolutely. I think all that is meant to do many things, but one of them, and perhaps the key, is the reason God allowed him to pull down the towers against the Philistines is that the Philistines, it was the time for their judgment. This is the way that it happened. Right throughout the Old Testament, we have God using evil parties to destroy other evil parties for the sake of judgment. That's what the whole book of Habakkuk's about. It's Habakkuk's crying out, how could you use this evil country to destroy Jerusalem when they're less evil? And God is saying, what do you know about such things? And so it's we see the same thing here, it seems, that Samson is certainly not all good, certainly not righteous, and yet is used by God to accomplish the purposes of God.